Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
Hi everyone, it's Barbara and welcome to Age Better. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to hear from you. Have a topic you'd love me to cover? A burning question about how to age better? Send your ideas to agebetterpodcast@gmail.com or reach out to me on social media. Now let's talk about something that's been all over social media lately, creatine. If you follow menopause and women's health experts, you've probably seen them raving about its benefits for muscle, brain health, energy, and even metabolism. But with all the buzz, I wanted to go straight to the best possible source. Dr. Abbie Smith-Ryan, a leading researcher and expert on creatine, especially as it relates to women. She's a professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she's done deep research on how creatine impacts women's health, particularly in midlife. Is creatine really a game changer? Who should take it? What are the real benefits? And what's just kind of hype? Dr. Smith-Ryan is here to break it all down. If you want to learn more about Dr. Smith-Ryan and her research, be sure to check out the links in the show notes after you listen to this really incredible conversation. Okay, y'all, get ready to age better. Hello, Dr. Smith-Ryan. Thank you so much for joining me today on Age Better.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So when I put it out on social media that I was going to be having this episode with you to talk about creatine, specifically creatine, I got a lot of questions. And so my questions today are going to be kind of a composite of their questions and my questions as well.
That sounds great.
Okay, so let's get right to it, like the basics. What is creatine?
It's such a simple compound, actually getting a lot of press right now. It's essentially a compound in the muscle that's made up of amino acids. Most importantly, it's a natural compound that we get from eating things like meat and fish.
Okay, and we always have heard, at least I have heard about creatine being associated with bodybuilders and guys who are in the gym lifting heavy weights, and women too, of course. So why is creatine so important for kind of your everyday average kind of athlete like me? I'm a runner. I do strength training. Why is creatine important to me and other women in midlife?
Yeah, I mean, if we even take a step back, creatine supplementation really feeds our phosphagen system, which is essential for creating ATP, which is our natural energy source. We all need ATP. And so really, we all need creatine because it helps us recover and kind of produce ATP more quickly or a bit more of those stores. And you need that whether you're lifting weights or trying to do your day job or being recreationally active. It's active all of the time.
So can we get ATP? Can we get creatine just without a supplement? Can we get it from food? I mean, you did mention meat and fish, but are we getting enough from meat and fish?
Yeah, I mean, we already have ATP, and I think for a long time, people are trying to figure out how do we get more of it. And one of those ways that has been studied for a long time is increasing our muscle creatine stores. But we do that naturally by just the food that we eat, mostly from animal products. So the majority of our creatine comes from things like beef and fish and chicken. The question a lot of times comes in, why would we supplement or do we need the supplement? And so the way I look at it as we should always start with whole foods and should really prioritize those foods. But if we are, and we can talk about dosing later, but if I am trying to get about 5 grams of creatine in my diet, which is about the minimum daily dose that we see some good benefit from, that would equate to almost 5 pounds of beef or salmon. And so yes, you could do it. But there's a lot of things that come along with the digestion and the cost and the feasibility of that.
So it's really interesting to me because, of course, we've all been hearing about how important protein is, especially protein timing, protein throughout the day, not just, which is very typical for the American diet, kind of eat bagels and cream cheese for breakfast and so on and so forth. And then you get to dinner, and that's when you have your meat and potatoes and vegetables, what have you, the bigger meal, if you will. And that's really, I think, has shown to be not the best way to approach protein intake. So this is very interesting to me. So you need to take more protein in order to get an increase in creatine, but it's like an awful lot of protein that we have to take. What are the biggest misconceptions about creatine and women? And again, specifically women in midlife.
Well, and I think, going back to your last point, creatine is not protein. And I think there's a misconception. We can create more creatine in the body naturally by having adequate amounts of protein. And there's direct kind of components there, which speaks to your question now of what benefits and why are women asking about creatine? And more importantly, like, why are we doing research in women with creatine? Because there's so many potential benefits. And when it's beyond, I think naturally we think first and foremost, creatine will increase the amount of ATP, which will allow us to, for instance, you mentioned, lifting weights and exercise. It might allow you to do a few more extra reps, sprint a little bit faster on your run to finish, which is fine, but I don't get super excited about that part. There's also many other benefits related to potential to improve lean mass. And as we age, women, and some of our work has shown and others that really into midlife, we tend to lose more muscle at a faster rate likely than men. But most importantly, we lose it at a faster rate midlife and perimenopause. So creatine may be able to help increase and at a minimum maintain that lean mass. There's some really great data from Dr. Darren Kandell's lab that demonstrates by combining resistance training with creatine, it actually helps bone. And so again, another thing it doesn't impact men, but more particularly females, that as we age, we lose bone mineral density. And creatine combined with exercise can help maintain that bone strength, which is really valuable.
Yes, and I talk a great deal about bone health. How important it is for healthy aging to be mobile and independent as we get older. I've been on the board of the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation for over 10 years.
Awesome.
And started our marathon team, the Be Bone Strong team. So I'm very integrated with them and with a real focus on bone health. So anything that crosses my path that I can relay back to my audience about benefiting their bone health as they get older is so, so important. That was going to be my next question. So there are studies that show that it really can benefit. But you also mentioned, and in your own research too, about the importance to brain health. And I found that fascinating. And metabolism, which you kind of touched on, like the lean mass, maybe losing weight. So talk to us about how else creatine can really help women in midlife.
Well, let's start with metabolism. So when we think about just the physiological role of creatine in the phosphagen system, that all happens in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell that we all remember. And creatine has been shown to provide greater mitochondrial stability, cell stability, and sometimes even act as an antioxidant that can help within the mitochondria. So it's not going to increase energy expenditure and cause weight loss, but it does appear to really help the stability of the mitochondria and mitochondrial health, which has an impact on aging. And then when we think about the brain health component, I would say that's more of a newer element that we're seeing. And there is strong data to show that women have lower creatine stores in the frontal lobe of the brain, which impacts a number of elements, but earlier data showing that by consuming creatine, slightly higher doses, it can help with elements of the brain, things like sleep, cognition, anxiety, and depression. But I always like to say it's only going to help the people that have some sort of distress or like lack of sleep or sleep disturbance or a little bit of anxiety, depression, or some cognitive impairments. And I say that kind of humorously because what woman doesn't have any of those things? And they only get worse as we age. So it's not magic, but it can really help support some of those things.
Yeah, well, that's my next topic is, of course, menopause. Oh boy, what happens to a woman's body during menopause. And so much we know now that we didn't know even very recently. For example, about how, and we've had a couple of episodes about this, talking about how hot flashes are not just a terrible inconvenience, like when you're in the middle of giving a presentation, but they can also impact your heart health dramatically. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know that until recently. So it's fascinating what's happening. So let's talk about menopause. You just listed a couple of symptoms that are very common in menopause: brain fog, sleepless nights, mood swings, could be depression also, very often connected. So it sounds like this is very promising, perhaps. So now maybe I understand why some of the doctors that I'm seeing on social media, we mentioned a few before we started recording, Dr. Mary Claire Haver, Dr. Vonda Wright, both of whom have been on my show before, talking about creatine specifically for women in menopause. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would even say a lot of times when we think about menopause, we think about aging, when in reality, we're seeing this is impacting women in their late 30s. And really, I see it as a continuum of postpartum, because postpartum, you have these brain changes, your bone changes, your muscle changes, sleep, anxiety, depression, and then that continues and exacerbates. But it happens earlier than people would be thinking about. Late 30s, you're not thinking perimenopause.
Right.
And when we think about some of these brain changes, well, I want to first and foremost say, creatine is not going to fix all of those. But whatever we do, we have to think about the risk to benefit ratio. And a lot of times, you get those 40-year-old females going to the doctor having these complaints, and what they're prescribed are SSRIs and things for anxiety and depression, which also have side effects.
Right.
When in reality, creatine could be one of those first lines of defense. Let's try it with minimal side effect, minimal cost, and similar, or at least helping with some of those symptoms. Does it work for everyone, and will it have a huge impact? That's what we're trying to explore, and what's all the mechanisms. But it does seem that at a slightly higher dose, so what we're seeing is about 10 grams per day at a minimum for those brain health effects, can be a really low risk first line of defense to help with some of those symptoms, especially if you've had a poor night's sleep, or, your anxiety and depression are high based on your hormonal cycle. So it's one of those things of why wouldn't you try it? There's such a low risk.
I was just going to say, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try this? And I have to be honest, full disclosure, I have not yet started on creatine. I was waiting for this conversation. I said, I'm going to wait. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to get the answers I want and everybody else wants too. And then I'm going to go ahead, most likely. So now let's kind of go to the next question. So what is the best way to take creatine? I'm sold. Okay. The dosage, the timing, how do we do this? And really, let's also talk about dosage.
Well, and I think it's such an important conversation, and I'd love if you even would, what are your concerns? Because I'm sure everyone has those concerns. And I think one of them is, you highlighted it earlier, that the majority of our creatine products on the market, probably 5 years ago, were very meathead focused. They were wrapped in pre-workouts, and it very much were marketed towards muscular men, which is scary. Now you can find just plain creatine monohydrate is really the way to go, because you can mix it in lots of different things. There's a couple ways to take creatine. The most traditional way that we do it in research is a loading phase, which is about 20 grams a day. And that's 4 doses of 5 grams of creatine. And I'll say the reason that we do that...
Scattered throughout the day?
Usually, split throughout the day.
Okay.
And generally, it's a powder, so it's mixed with 4 to 6 ounces of water.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting some fluid, which I'll talk about some of the important parts here. The loading phase, what we know is about 5 days of 20 grams will increase muscle creatine quite effectively, which is why we do that in the lab. Because then after 5 days, we know that we're seeing the effects of creatine, and it's a pretty effective way. However, for like day-to-day use, I don't often recommend a loading dose. Sometimes I do, but in reality, if we take about 5 grams a day,
Yep.
every day, we'll see the same effect. It'll just take maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks to see that same rise in muscle creatine stores. So there's a couple different options of that loading phase followed by a maintenance dose of 2 to 3 grams or a daily dose of about 5 grams is really where we see the traditional effects. I want to say one more thing based on the new data with brain and cognition. Most of that data is showing a slightly higher dose, about 10 grams a day.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I'll use a little bit more on those days where, I might need to get that word quicker, or my sleep is lower, or I'm traveling, kind of that cognitive load is higher. That slightly higher dose seems to be needed to get more into the brain. So for those brain effects, a slightly higher dose might be helpful.
Okay, so just to summarize then, you do recommend about 5 days of loading 20 grams per day and then going on to a maintenance.
I would say the only way I would recommend a loading dose if someone came to me and said, I am feeling really terrible. I am not recovering. I'm not sleeping. I would really like to see the benefits of creatine very quickly and see if they work for me. Then I would say, okay, if you want to see how fast they would impact, a loading dose might be a good approach. If it's someone that just wants to have the general everyday effects and it's going to be combined with other lifestyle things, a 5-gram dose is just fine.
Got it. Okay.
And it's remembering to do it 4 times a day, evenly spaced for 5 days is also compliance. Consistency is important. So it really just depends on the person of if I would recommend a loading phase.
Okay. Yeah. For someone like me, again, I'm a runner. I have a little stress fracture at the moment. So not exactly running or jumping or, anything high impact like that, but it's healing. But I am very focused on strength training, other parts of my body now. And of course, I will get back to running at some point, and just general overall health and well-being, and keeping an eye on my muscle mass and my bone health always. So it just sounds to me like, me personally, it sounds like, I might consider the 20 grams.
Well, for you
day.
For you with the stress fracture, I actually think it might be more beneficial to potentially accelerate the healing. Now, It doesn't impact it directly, but if you are loading your skeleton, it absolutely wouldn't hurt.
Okay.
And so, I think it would be, especially if you've never taken it, it will saturate your muscle creatine stores much quicker.
Oh,
so
that's
I think
really
for you,
good
that's
news.
a good.
Okay. Oh, that's good news. Good news. I am definitely going to try that. Now, let's talk about what types. I don't know if you can mention any specific brands that you recommend or not. That's up to you. But are there specific kinds of creatine? Because, just like there are different kinds of whey protein, isolate or not isolate, or plant-based. So is there a different kind of creatine that we should be looking for that you recommend?
Yeah, all of the research is done on creatine monohydrate. Mm-hmm. And so there are different types of creatine monohydrate. I would say, so right now, the patented form of Creapure, which is the only one that is GRAS status, generally recommended as safe. I say that in like all creatine monohydrate is very safe. But if you wanted that extra level of certification and quality, Creapure is really the best form. And I think what's so great about technology now is that it used to be this sediment that would fall in the bottom of your cup. And now there's some better powdered form like Crea Vitalis, which is the same kind of patent, and then even in gummy form. And so honestly, it's whatever people will do every day that increases compliance.
Yes.
And then creatine monohydrate is really what I would have people focus on.
Okay.
There's lots of other brands trying to make a lot of money, but the monohydrate is really the most effective and quite affordable.
Okay. I'll have links to a couple of things, everyone, in the show notes, so you can take a look at that later. Are there any risks? You said there's really kind of low risk, but is there any will I feel bloating? Could I gain weight? Was something I read somewhere that indicated that's a possibility. Will I have a stomach upset? Is there anything we should be aware of?
So I think this is a really important question because everything we do, even down to the food we eat, comes with some sort of potential side effect. And for creatine monohydrate, it's attached to a water molecule, monohydrate. And so the one way that it actually is really effective for that mitochondrial health and the lean mass is it actually brings water into the cell, which is really beneficial for that cellular health. But for two things, if someone is very dehydrated and there's no water to pull into the cell, that can be problematic. So drinking water is helpful, just like as you increase protein intake. The other element that we've studied actually a lot is women with hormonal changes, particularly right before you menstruate or as we go through perimenopause, it fluctuates. Sometimes we hold more water extracellularly. You know, it's those days that we feel a little puffy, we might gain a little bit of weight. What we've shown is that creatine will actually take that extracellular fluid and pull it into the cell. And that really helps with cellular hydration and prevents some of that or reduces some of that edema.
Wow, that's really fascinating, actually.
Yeah.
Really, really fascinating. So a question about actually taking it. So I take collagen powder in my coffee every morning. I've been doing it for a couple of years. And also I will have an occasional smoothie with a whey isolate protein powder for lunch or so. And can I add that? Can they be mixed together? Does it matter?
Nope, absolutely. You can add it. The only thing, a lot of people add it in a yogurt because it still sometimes has some sediment. So a smoothie, coffee, that's fine. The one I would be leery of is sometimes we'll see creatine in a ready to drink, like an already liquid. We don't know the stability of that yet, but mixing it on your own and having it immediately is not going to have a big impact.
That sounds like good advice. Steer clear of the liquid, the pre-made ones, everyone. So what does the latest research say about creatine's role in longevity and healthy aging overall? Anything that coming down the pike, anything that you're working on yourself that we should know about?
Yeah, can I say one other thing on a side effect that I didn't get to address?
Sure.
You mentioned weight gain, and I just hadn't quite got there. I really wanted to make it clear because actually most women are concerned about the weight gain. And it's really important to look at the data that weight gain usually only happens in males. It could be driven by the amount of muscle mass someone has. And then if someone does a loading dose, they may expect to see 1 to 2 pounds of weight gain, but it's coming from that cellular hydration I mentioned. It's bringing water into the cell. And then it usually subsides within a couple days. In females specifically, we've actually only seen about a 0.5 pound increase in weight.
Okay.
So it's really important to realize like weight gain is not, I gain 0.5 pound if I eat more carbohydrates, right? Like I think it's important to realize it's not a massive amount of weight and it actually is a really good element. So make that straight. So.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a healthy kind of weight gain.
Absolutely.
So not anything that. So about any research before we move on to another topic.
Yeah. We are doing a lot of work right now with creatine. I mentioned some of the hydration and exercise across the menstrual cycle, but also dialing in a little bit more into those fluid distributions, things about the cellular health and integrity of the cell and how creatine can impact that. Because with aging, everyone's probably aware of all of these supplements trying to target cellular health.
Yes.
It appears that creatine can really help with some of that cell stability. And so we are trying to look at some of those mechanics and how it relates to hormones and how the hormonal changes impact that. And then we are also looking at, you mentioned some of the symptoms and side effects of menopause, the vasomotor, sleep. We are trying to explore some of the ways to mitigate those with lifestyle behaviors, being exercise and nutrition, so creatine specifically, especially because we're starting to see things like lean mass. Higher lean mass is related to a lower menopausal symptoms, and higher physical activity, intensity of activity is related to lower severity and intensity of symptoms.
Right.
And so we're looking at some timing of creatine and creatine combined with high intensity resistance training in perimenopause specifically to see how it can modulate the muscle metabolic rate, fat utilization and protein turnover.
Right. And thank you for that. And one thing I always like to point out with everyone is that you can't view these things as a magic amulet. You just can't.
Mm-hmm.
Like the GLP-1, Ozempic, and the like, magic amulet. And then very often, and I've seen this myself personally, very often people will then, oh, well, I don't have to exercise. I'm losing the weight. Yay. And well, look at what's happening to their bone health and their lean muscle mass and so on, and overall health. So this is the same thing. I mean, in my mind, creatine is a supplement, exactly what it is, a supplement to a healthy lifestyle, meaning everyone get out there and you got to do the strength. We know this. I mean, I nag everyone, but with love in my heart, as I like to say. And we've talked about this so much in so many episodes with some great experts on about how important doing strength training is, and also cardio, of course, and including HIIT, high intensity interval training, incredibly valuable to our overall health and wellness. So view creatine as a supplement to this healthy lifestyle. So I just want to kind of make sure I get that point across to all of you.
Well, and more importantly, even too, when we think about and look at the literature, creatine seems to be mostly effective when we think about lean mass and bone, only if you combine it with exercise, particularly strength training. But I always like to make space because there's so many women struggling of like, they have no energy to get out there. They, have their days where they're high fatigued or their brain fog is so terrible. I think the one benefit of those individuals that, I think a lot of people are trying to be active. And my goal as a researcher is to reduce as many barriers as possible. And when we think about something like creatine, is that it may help with some of that fatigue or that brain fog. That doesn't mean it's going to make increased lean mass if you don't exercise, but if it takes that edge off and allows you then a little bit more energy to go out for that walk or lift up those weights, then I always say, try it. It's not a magic bullet. And I think that's where some of the misinformation comes from. But it is really one of those first lines of defense that might be helpful to try to see, does it impact your fatigue and energy and help you lift those weights that, and recover a little bit faster that helps you go again the next day.
Thank you for that too, and clarifying as well. And so I'm going to start taking it, as I've said publicly a few minutes ago. And how long will it take for me to possibly feel the effects of taking creatine, do you think?
Yeah, I think I would ask you like, well, what are you expecting to feel?
Right.
And so usually within a couple of days, if you combine it with exercise, you might have that benefit. And really it's greater volume. So you're able to do a little bit more, recover a little bit faster. And so if you're really in tune with your body, you'll see effects within a couple of days of that loading. But it's not going to make you like massively stronger and put on 10 pounds of muscle. But over time, yeah, you should see a bit more of lean mass. So I think it would just be, it sounds like you do all the right things. So you know
far.
well, then that small margin of error makes a difference. And you start to see when those small things are added that are effective. The thing too that we don't often talk about, no matter what we do, there's always responders and non-responders, meaning some people respond better and some people have a lower response. And so we always say that of like, you may be a non-responder, and that means you won't see huge effects, but you'll still probably see some changes, which is why it's just really important to only change one thing at a time and really ask yourself, do I see an effect? And is it worth it to keep going?
Right. And then also, though, some of these, the impact it could have could be, you can't see them. Like bone health and muscle mass. I mean, you might feel stronger. You can even test your grip strength. I mean, I guess there are ways, of course, to see. But I would be more inclined to just say, there's enough science now behind this to say that it is going to help. It's not going to hurt, as you said earlier. Like, why not?
100%.
Yeah.
Only
I'm
positive
excited.
benefit. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. This was a great conversation, so helpful. I very often decide to do episodes based on what do I want to know?
Yeah,
And then I put it out there and go, I want to know this, everyone. What do you want to know about that? Yes. And I'm never alone in wanting to know this information. So this was really, really helpful.
Did we answer all your questions? Do you have any questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, absolutely. But before we let you go, I know how busy you are. Can you just share what you think are your three biggest takeaways from this conversation today?
Gosh, okay. Number one would be creatine is definitely advantageous for females and maybe more so than males. And I would say that all the way from pregnancy and beyond, even starting when you menstruate. It's definitely low risk. So the benefit outweighs the risk when you can't say that a lot for a lot of what we do. And it's not scary. Like add it in and see what happens. There's, only potential benefit.
Yeah, so true. Everything I've read that you've written, everything, I really follow you on PubMed. I've seen a lot of what you do and other science. And I am convinced, and again, I just wanted to do this episode to kind of make sure before I go for it. And so thank you for that. And I know everyone listening in will feel a level of comfort now to try it out for themselves as well, because it sounds like, really, why not? Like, why not? Why not? Right?
Absolutely.
Actually, is there anyone who absolutely should not?
It's a good question. I would say there's still really good safety data in individuals with one kidney. And there's growing data in our clinically diseased populations. But I would say if you have a chronic disease, particularly related to kidney disease, it might not be my first thing to try. But yeah, there's very minimal risk. So there's always a qualifier. Yes, if you have some other chronic diseases, it wouldn't be the first thing. And I would say, work with a registered dietitian to make sure that, you're tracking the right things in the blood work.
Right. Got it. Or check with your PCP, your primary care physician. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith-Ryan. I so appreciate this. It was a great conversation, and I really hope you'll come back.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the opportunity and spreading the science. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode of Age Better Podcast, please do a few things. First, share it with all your friends and family. Then subscribe to Age Better wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, so you never miss a single episode. Finally, if you have ideas for topics you want me to cover in a future episode of Age Better, send an email to agebetterpodcast@gmail.com or reach out to me on social media. Until next time, remember this: we can't control getting older, but we can control how we do it. Talk to you soon. Age Better Podcast is a proud member of the Sound Advice Network. Sound Advice, women's voices amplified.